Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we have another Oathbreaker deck tech. This is our second one. This one is titled Shaman Smash. And if you didn't see our last one that was posted last week, it's very similar to our Commander's Guild series where we are randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a deck around a theme of the chosen card. So I want to start with a unique introduction to this deck, and that is to talk about the gameplay and opponents first rather than last. And the reason we're doing that is because, again, I'm not quite sure who the opponents are going to be for this deck. And the reason for that is because there were two sets of games that were played last Saturday, October 9th. The first one at 10 a.m., the second at 6 p.m. EST. And the first one was with Evan Brando, Mono White Border, and Fearphage. And the second was with Alex Kessler, Signature Spell Bomb, and Nikki at Magic Kids. And if you are interested in seeing these games, because this deck that we're about to talk about did show up multiple times and played several games throughout the course of these streams, they were all for charity, designed to help out weird kids and Magic cards, and you can always go back and check out these videos. Brando's you can find on his Twitch channel, and Kessler's you can find on the MMCast YouTube channel that was posted at the same time as the stream. So if you get the chance to check these out, you can't obviously win any prizes for donating, but if you would still like to donate, you are certainly welcome to do so. Weird Cards and Magic Kids are a phenomenal organization, and as a middle school teacher myself, I have personally benefited from Magic Kids in the past because of the games club that I run after school, so I really can't say enough good things about this organization. And if you do, like I said, get the chance to donate, it would be very much appreciated. But with that out of the way, we're going to jump into our deck tech for this week, and our random card for the week was Tattermunge Witch, which is 1 and a hybrid Gruul for a Goblin Shaman 2/1. You can pay red and green, and each blocked creature gets +1/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. A very unique card. I wasn't quite sure what to do with it at first, so I decided to try to pick a fun Gruul commander to build around, or an Oathbreaker to build around. And so, with Tattermunge Witch in mind, I decided on Domri, Anarch of Bolas, and Atarka's Command as our Oathbreaker and Signature Spell. Domri is a legendary planeswalker, comes in with 3 loyalty, and it has a static ability that says creatures you control get +1/+0, so very useful if we're giving everything trample with Tattermunge Witch. We can add 1 loyalty and add a red or a green mana, and creature spells you cast this turn can't be countered. And -2, target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. And then to pair with that, we have Atarka's Command, which is green and a red for an instant, and we can choose 2. Your opponents can't gain life this turn. Atarka's Command deals 3 damage to each opponent. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield, or creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain reach until end of turn. So we are hopefully going to be able to have powerful creatures, things like Tattermunge Witch and some other things, give them a buff with Domri, and then use Atarka's Command to kind of deal with whatever the situation may need. So if we need bigger creatures, we can do that. If we need to do 3 damage to each opponent, we can do that. If we need to stop our opponents from gaining life or ramp, Atarka's Command lets us do all of that. And so, with our Oathbreaker, Signature Spell, and Random Card of the Week out of the way, let's take a look at some themes. And our first theme this week is actually going to be Shaman. This is a Shaman tribal deck, since Tattermunge Witch is a Shaman. And to that end, we have Sachi, Daughter of Sashiro, for 2 green, legendary creature, Snake Shaman, 1/3. Other snakes you control get +0/+1. I'll be perfectly honest, we don't really have many other snakes. We have 1 or 2, but that's not a main theme here. But the important part is that it also says shamans you control have tap, add 2 green to your mana pool. So all of our shamans, which are about 99% of our creatures, now tap for 2 green each, letting us kind of power out as many creatures as we possibly can. And there's other shaman synergies in here as well. Some we'll go into a little bit later, but Because Tattermunge Witch is a Shaman, and I personally am a big fan of the Shaman creature type, I decided that going Shaman Tribal would be kind of an interesting take for this deck. And then our second theme are +1/+1 counters. So Metallic Mimic, 2 mana for a 2/1 Shapeshifter. As Metallic Mimic enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. It's always going to be Shamans. Metallic Mimic is the chosen type in addition to its other types. And then each other creature you control with the chosen type enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So this lets all of our Shamans come in with an extra 1/1 counter, which makes them incredibly powerful. It turns Tattermunge Witch into a 2 mana 3/2, which is very good. Turns Sachi into not super great, but a 4 mana 2/4, which is better than a 1/3. And it's able to get a ton of 1/1 counters on our creatures, which comes in handy for several other cards in the deck as well. And then finally, our last theme is kind of hurting our opponents for activating abilities. We want to make sure that if our opponents are doing anything, it's probably going to wind up hurting them. So Burning Tree Shaman is 1 red-green for a 3/4 Centaur Shaman. Whenever a player activates an ability that isn't a mana ability, Burning Tree Shaman deals 1 damage to that player. Because Oathbreaker is all about having Planeswalkers as your commander, activating a loyalty ability of a Planeswalker counts as activating ability, and it's not a mana ability, so Burning Tree Shaman does 1 to each opponent whenever they activate their Planeswalkers, whenever they activate any artifacts or creatures, anything that they've got going on. Now, to be fair, this is a symmetrical effect. It will hurt us too, but the hope is that we can put enough creatures on board, put enough pressure on the board, that our opponents are going to get a lot more pain out of it than we are, and we can kind of close out the deal from there. So, those are our themes, and with those out of the way, let's take a look at some key cards, some cards that we would really like to have if possible. The first one, Vanquisher's Banner. This is not our main payoff, but one of our biggest payoffs for being Shaman Tribal. This is a 5 mana artifact. When it comes in, choose a creature type. Again, Shaman. And then creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. And whenever you cast a creature spell of the chosen type, draw a card. So, because a lot of our Shamans are incredibly cheap, they tend to be 1, 2, 3 mana, and we have a lot of ways of helping them to generate mana. We have a lot of ways to ramp. We have a lot of ways to just keep producing mana as we go. Vanquisher's Banner could, in theory, draw us 3 to 4, 5 cards a turn if we can hit the right cards on the top of our deck. So Vanquisher's Banner is very powerful, really lets us power out a ton of creatures when we need them, and is overall just a phenomenal card for this deck. Next, we have Rage Forger, which is our main payoff card for the +1/+1 counters, and it's 2 and a red for an Elemental Shaman 2/2. When it comes into play, put a +1/+1 counter on each other Shaman creature you control, so we can very quickly make our board a lot scarier than our opponents thought it might be. And then whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it attacks, you may have that creature deal 1 damage to target player. Now, it's very important. This has been errated to say 1 damage to target player or Planeswalker. So when we attack with Rage Forger, it doesn't have to target the player that we are attacking or the Planeswalker that we are attacking. We can send all of our creatures at the person who can't block, and then send all of the damage from Rage Forger to a different player or a different Planeswalker that we're not even attacking. So Rage Forger is incredibly powerful in this deck, especially if we have multiple creatures with 1/1 counters on them. This can be a lot of damage very, very quickly. And then finally, our last card, which goes surprisingly well with Rage Forger, is Harmonic Prodigy. 1 and a red for a 1/3 human wizard with prowess. And if an ability of a shaman or another wizard you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So even if we just compare this with Rage Forger, that means that when Rage Forger comes in, it puts 2 +1/+1 counters on each of our creatures, making them much larger than they were before. And whenever those creatures attack, they do 2 damage to any targets. So Harmonic Prodigy turns all of our creatures into massive, massive threats. And not that they weren't threats before, most of our creatures can definitely hold their own as is, but being able to double up on triggers and double up on abilities is a huge, huge benefit for this deck. So we always want to get Harmonic Prodigy if we get the chance. So, with some key cards and themes that we've mentioned, I do want to take a look at some cool interactions in this deck. Some things that I noticed putting this deck together that I think are tons of fun or phenomenal ways to get some value, get some combos. And the first one of those is Grumgully the Generous and Woodfall Primus. So Grumgully the Generous is 1 red-green for a legendary creature Goblin Shaman, 3/3. Each other non-human creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. We do have some humans, but not too many, so the Grumgully puts in a fair bit of work. But if we compare that with Woodfall Primus, which is 5 green, 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 and is the most expensive card in this deck, mana value-wise at least, for a Treefolk Shaman 6/6 trample, when Woodfall Primus enters the battlefield, destroy target non-creature permanent, and it has Persist. So when it dies, it comes back with a -1/-1 counter if it didn't already have a -1/-1 counter. So the way this would work is we'd have Grumgully on the board, we cast Woodfall Primus, it comes in and destroys a non-creature permanent. Whenever Woodfall Primus dies, it comes back into play with a -1/-1 counter and a +1/+1 counter from Grumgully, which cancel each other out, meaning that Woodfall Primus could die an infinite number of times and continuously come back and destroy our opponent's things. Now, we have 1 sacrifice outlet in this deck, so we could, in theory, trigger this an infinite number of times and just wipe our opponent's boards of everything but creatures, but that's very unlikely. Really, this is just in here as a value engine, being able to make sure that we have a 6/6 with trample that is still a shaman, that still gets a buff from a lot of our creatures, that is very, very difficult for our opponents to deal with, because if they kill it, it comes back and blows something up. So that is the main goal of this interaction. And then our second cool interaction to point out is between Delina Wildmage and Timeless Witness. So Delina Wildmage, 3 and a red for a Elf Shaman, 3/2. Whenever Delina Wildmage attacks, choose target creature you control, then roll a d20. If you roll a 1 through 14, you create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary, and it has exile this creature at the end of combat. And if you roll a 15 through 20, you create one of those tokens, but then you roll again. So if you can hit 15 through 20 multiple times, you get multiple token copies of a creature that are tapped and attacking. Now, that's not super useful if we're looking at just kind of 1/1s and 2/2s, but if we pair that with a creature with a very powerful enter the battlefield effect like Timeless Witness, it becomes incredibly difficult for our opponents to deal with. So Timeless Witness, 2 green, green for a human shaman, 2/1. When Timeless Witness enters the battlefield, return target card from your graveyard to your hand, and then it has Eternalize for 5 green, green. So if we swing with Delina, we make a copy of Timeless Witness, that lets us get something for free back to our hands. If we're lucky enough to roll a 15 through 20, we could get 2, maybe even 3, possibly more, but it's very unlikely, cards back into our hand from our graveyard. So we're able to just rebuy all of our creatures that have died, any instants and sorceries, and just kind of keep the chain going. And as long as Delina doesn't die in combat, we can do the same thing next turn. So a phenomenal ability between the two, and I could have put any Enter the Battlefield effect here for Timeless Witness, but I did want to showcase Timeless Witness because I do think it's a phenomenal card, and it's very cheap at the moment. We do have Eternal Witness in here as well, which is the same card, just cost 1 less. And then we have things like Reclamation Sage, we have a bunch of Enter the Battlefield effects, even Woodfall Primus, everything that could enter the battlefield and trigger is a phenomenal target for Delina. And so, with the majority of the deck tech out of the way, let's take a quick look at the price of the deck, which this week came out to $98.11, which is very high, considering this is a 60-card deck, not a 100-card deck, But that meant I was able to play with the price a little bit more. You noticed going through that we had Vanquisher's Banner, that was about $10. I was able to put some more expensive cards in the deck than I normally would for a commander deck because it is less cards. Now, obviously, if you wanted to cut the price down, you could. Our most expensive card this week was actually Thornbite Staff at $11.93. This is a tribal artifact Shaman equipment, so it does trigger all of our Shaman effects. And it says equipped creature has pay 2, tap. This creature deals 1 damage to target creature or player. And whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, untap this creature. Then, whenever a Shaman creature comes into play, you may attach Thornbite Staff to it and equip for 4. So we can just kind of freely equip Thornbite Staff to any Shamans that come in. This is a phenomenal card. It's also a bit of a combo piece in some decks, not this one, so the price doesn't quite match what we're using it for in this deck, but it's not a bad card, and it does definitely do some good work in here as well. And now, before we move on, though, I do want to very quickly mention that there is technically another more expensive card in here if you're looking at certain printings of it, and so I do want to highlight that card as well. It would be Fauna Shaman for 1 and a green, Creature Elf Shaman, 2/2, green, tap. Discard a creature card, search your library for a creature card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. This comes in at $13.42, but the reason that this isn't the most expensive card in this deck is actually because the M11 printing is only $11.53, which is slightly less expensive than Thornbite Staff, so it didn't quite make the cut for most expensive card, but I did want to point it out because it's only about 40 cents cheaper than our most expensive card, and I felt that it at least deserved a bit of a mention. So with all of that being said, though, I hope you guys did enjoy the deck tech. If you have any suggestions for future videos, please let me know. If you would be interested in seeing more Oathbreaker content, I would love to hear about that as well. So please like the video, subscribe if you're not already, leave some suggestions down in the comments, and I do hope you guys get the chance to go back and check out the Oathbreaker games as well. The streams are going to be in the description. They were earlier in the video as well. They were very good games. I had a ton of fun filming it. And as I said before, Weird Cards and Magic Kids are phenomenal organizations and definitely deserve all of the support. So with that, I hope you enjoyed the video, hope you enjoyed the deck tech, and if you saw the games, I hope you enjoyed those as well. But I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.